Okay, so I will speak and then I will let the speakers use this.
Yeah, you don't have to. You can put it on the table if you want to pick up some. Just
Great. Yeah. Okay. We can start now. Welcome to the first formal technical session of the 12th International Islamic Liberty Roundtable Conference. This year we consciously adopted this format rather than an open auditorium format so that we can have more discussion among the speakers and the participants. But we still requested that to steer the discussion in a structured manner, we requested our various speakers to present their papers and presentations. The first session we are having is on foundations of freedom and pluralism. Got three very interesting and engaging presentations here. The first presentation will talk about economic freedom, and particularly document Islam, Muslims and Lessons for the First Century. That is by Mustafa Acar and Dr. Özgür Kanbir. And the second presentation is on genealogy of Islamic legal thought in Europe, lessons for Muslim communities in an era of division by Mohamed Badredine, Anglo-American University in Austria and in Prague. And the third presentation is on beyond the incompatibility narrative, the potential and future of liberalism in Muslim societies by Professor Dr. Ömer Faruk at Istanbul Medeniyet University. So I corrected from Medipol to Medeniyet University. There are three presentations. They are talking about different aspects of freedom and pluralism. And I think you will find the diversity and you will find the nuance, and particularly the last presentation about this typology that we often try to create. But first of all, I'd like to explain that we have, in terms of time, we are good. We almost have 2 hours. The guidelines that we circulated suggested that oh, that's great. Thank you. Speak for 20 minutes each, presentation, and then we can have a discussion. So about an hour for the presentations and another hour for discussion. So ample time, but rather than keeping the discussion at the very end, since the topics are also different, I would suggest that we have one presentation and some questions and discussions on that presentation, and then we move on to the second presentation, because we can't really lump all topics together in one go, and I think it will keep the discussion flow also quite interactive. So if we are all set in terms of logistics, and we can begin. Edu, do I have a green signal from you? Do I have a green signal? Thank you, Edu.
Just also another news you're most probably looking for the Wi-Fi is the IS guest, and the password is just conference 2026, everything small letters.
Okay.
Conference 2026 is the password.
And IS guest.
IUS guest. Wonderful.
What is it again? Guest, yes. And then conference, everything small letters. 2026. It's working?
It works.
It works?
So Edu brought us water and Wi-Fi. Two most important
See you tomorrow. See you at the closing.
two most important parts of our life now. We can't survive without water. We can't survive without Wi-Fi. That's it.
The basics.
Nothing else. Nothing else. Connected. MashaAllah. Let's begin with our first presentation, Islam, Muslims and Economic Freedom, Lessons for the 21st Century by Mustafa Acar and Özgür Kanbir.
Thank you, sir.
And you can use this, I guess.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
But it's. I think it doesn't work. Doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Sorry. No, there is turn off.
Yes.
Now
No.
on.
No, can
Okay.
you please go there? I think this is not working.
Full screen.
It's working?
Yes.
Okay.
Configuration.
This is PDF file.
PDF
I think
files.
That's why it's not presentation.
Okay.
Oh. Yeah, just do that.
Ah,
Nice, thank you.
thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Please.
I'm Associated Professor Özgür Kanbir from Giresun University. I'm deeply honored to be in the homeland of Ali Izetbegovic. I would like to express my gratitude to IOLAN, Mr. Ali, and Edo Ömerovic from the University of Sarajevo for organizing this event. And my master, Professor Mustafa Acar, and I prepared this presentation together. The title of my presentation is Islam, Muslims and Economic Freedom, Lessons from the 21st century. 21st century. The economic prosperity of Muslim societies lies in not in abandoning their heritage, but in rediscovering the principles of limited government and open society embedded within Islam's rational foundations. The development paradox. Countries with Muslim majorities lag behind war average in key socio-economic indicators: poverty, economic instability, weak institutional structures, lack of democracy. This has prompted a critical inquiry. Is Islam itself an obstacle to economic development? This question is about 150 years old. The pillars of prosperity. There are three pillars of prosperity: economic freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. The economic freedom, the ability of individuals to act on their own decisions without coercion. Key driver of investment, innovation, and poverty reduction. Democracy, a system that limits arbitrary power and enables the peaceful transfer of authority. Essential safeguard for individual freedom and accountable governance. The rule of law means that individuals are governed not by the arbitrary desires of those in power, but the clear, general, and abstract principles of law. The fundamental purpose of this principle is protect individuals from the arbitrary use of power by the state or others, and to provide each individual with a secure space in which they can implement their own plans independently of the will of others. This figure, the size of the circles is adjusted according to the HDI, Human Development Index scores of the countries in that group. This figure names the institutional gap visualized. For the year 20,000, 2025. Historical and nowadays, the situation, this figure, vertical democracy score, vertical indicator, and other indicator, economic freedom score.
Just a minute. So, dear friends, the bottom line is OIC countries, the Muslim majority countries, in other words, unfortunately does not show a good, promising outlook, as you see, both in terms of democracy score as well as economic freedom score. And the size of the circle, as my friend said, represents the size of the HDI, Human Development Index score. So the larger the size is, the higher the score, the lower, and vice versa. So in other words, unfortunately, the outlook, the general outlook of Muslim majority countries, the members of OIC countries, is not very bright, very promising, lower scores of democracy as well as economic freedom. That's the bottom line. Okay.
Yes, thanks, sir. Takeover OIC countries demonstrate a critical institutional misalignment, partial economic liberalization without inclusive political institutions. OIC countries rank low in both democracy and economic freedom score. They are 57 countries as are listed here. Uncovering the cause, culture or institutions. Does the problem stem from the essence of Islam? Common assumption, a widespread narrative attributes the gap to inherent cultural or religious factors. Our argument, the evidence points not culture but to a legacy of specific historically conscient institutional choices. The legacy of the centralized state, the roots of economic stagnation are found in a historical preference for state-dominated economic systems. Centralized empires, colonial legacy, 20th century models, and the result. Centralized empires, Ottoman and Arab states, are large and owning entities, creating a proto-quasi socialist economy. Colonial legacy, reinforced state control and extractive institutions. 20th century models, widespread adoption of socialist, autarkic, and rentier state models. The result, a weak private sector, subjugated civil society, and widespread corruption.
In other words, the underdeveloped and weak scores of OIC members, Muslim majority countries, in our opinion, does not come from the Islam itself, the religion itself, but rather from more institutional factors. The colonial legacy, centralized empires in the past, and unfortunately the dictatorship regimes of the 20th century, nationalist, corrupt governments, etc. So it is related with not the principles, not the religion itself, but rather how it is actually exercised in reality, the institutional legacy. Yeah, misuse of the, exactly. Go ahead.
Excuse me. rediscovering the foundations prevent poverty. Core principle, the fundamental search of Islam ardently defend the sanctity and inviolability of private poverty and individual enterprise. Such evidence, Quran, explicitly recognized and regulates private poverty and drought inheritance rules. Prophet Muhammad described profit as a blessing from Allah and was a merchant himself. Human life and property are inviolable. The Prophet Muhammad farewell sermon. Rediscovering the foundations, competition, and free markets. Core principle, Islam supports a natural market order and reject artificial price interventions.
Next.
Next, yes. Key historical president, when asked to fix rising market price, the Prophet Muhammad refused, stating, "The price are determined by Allah." Interpretation, this demonstrated a profound belief the self-organizing order of the market centuries before Adam Smith.
Okay, let me add a few words if you like. The three most important characteristics of Medina Bazaar, Medina market, was the following. Number one, it was actually exercised in a flat area. Flat area, that means everybody was able to see who is there, selling what's going on. So this is transparency in modern terms. Number two, there was not a specific location or corner specific to any single seller. So whoever comes first was able to offer his products at that corner. This week is mine and it could be yours next week. So there was not monopolization or oligopolization of any specific corner. Market was a flat area and open to everyone. Number three, there is no fix of prices. Prices were fixed, not fixed. Was able to, flexible depending on the demand and supply. Prices were changing. Once upon, some of the Sahaba, some of the sellers asked him, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to fix the prices because it was too high or something. The narration is that he thought about it for 3 days. If he has the right to fix the prices or not. Obviously, he waited for a revelation to come, but there was no. And said, in the end, prices are determined by Allah. It's not under my control, and I don't want to go the hereafter to the face of God and with a burden on my shoulder because I fixed the prices. So in other words, we have the free market principles, changing prices, transparency principles, way in the early experience of the Muslim society, centuries before Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and all the classical liberal thinkers of the West. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks. And next slide, rediscovering the foundation, the limited state. Core principle, the state's role is not to dominate the economy, but to be a servant of law, ensuring justice and security. Scholarly support Ibn Khaldun argued that high taxes are state competition with the economic hinder economic growth. Early Islamic governance, obey me if I am on the right path, and don't obey me if I am not, Khalif Abu Bakr. Interpretation rulers themselves are subject to higher law, not above it.
Again, a few words on the importance of lower taxes. As our Syrian brother and the businessman underlined in his opening speech, low taxes is crucial, and those who are coming from economics area should know about the Laffer curve. Laffer curve is an American economist in the 20th century. Actually, he showed the importance of lower taxes. If you keep increasing the tax rates, after sooner or later, the revenue, collected revenues, the amount of revenues should go down. And this is actually a point mentioned, underlined centuries ago, 600 years ago, by the famous Muslim thinker and the business and the statesman Ibn Khaldun. He said, if government keeps increasing the taxes, then there will be lower economic activity, and people will not be able to pay taxes, and the collection of taxes will go down.
You have 5 minutes.
Really? Go ahead, please.
Okay. And next slide. The political framework from Shura to democracy. The key concept Shura, a core Quranic principle commanding that community affairs to be conducted through consultation. It mandates an open, transparent, and participatory approach to governance. The modern analog, in the modern context, the most concrete counterpart to Shura is not monarchy or totalitarianism, but liberal democracy. Connection, Shura provides the ethical foundation for accountable leadership and participatory governance, the cornerstones of a democratic system. The intellectual engine revitalizing ijtihad. Key concept, ijtihad, the vital mechanism for adapting Islamic principles to changing conditions. The historical problem, the closure to the door of ijtihad from the 13th century led to intellectual inertia and economic decline. The path forward requires revitalizing ijtihad to distinguish universal principles from historical cultural practice. This reconnect modern Muslims with the rationalist school of early Islamic thought. Islamic values for a liberal order, individualism and freedom. Individual accountability is central. Destiny is a result of one's choices. The rule of law, adl, justice requires general abstract rules applied equally to all, including rulers. Public interest, maslahat, allows for the social welfare functions without distorting the market mechanisms. Economic justice encourage ethical commerce, reduction transaction cost, and enhancing market efficiency. A roadmap to prosperity. First, institutional reform, prioritize the rule of law, protection of property rights, and combating corruption. Second, democratization, building participatory governance models based on the principle of shura, and then limits the state, confine government to its core functions, providing a legal framework, not controlling the market. And fourth, revitalize intellectual culture, promote ijtihad to foster a rational, libertarian interpretation of Islamic tradition and sustainable welfare. The way of forward, a rediscovering of freedom. The solution for the Muslim world is not the choice between an authoritarian statu quo and a wholesale rejection of its identity. True prosperity lies in building an open society and a limited state by embracing the liberal and rational foundations inherent within Islam itself. Thank you. My presentation is done.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa and Dr. Acar, for very concise and very well delivered presentation. Very thoughtful and nicely presented. I open the floor for questions and comments. Please, Dr. Said.
Thank you. Really wonderful to hear your remark. I'm glad that you raised the Medina example because right now it's so contested, particularly looking at it as an example for civic, political engagement in so many capacities. But why was Yathrib a failure, whereas Medina was not a failure economically? After all, Medina or Yathrib was in a very enviable position geographically. It was a commercial center, but I would suggest that the reason why Yathrib was unsuccessful was exactly because you didn't have a coherent state. You had the Aus and the Khazraj who were constantly in a state of political turmoil. There was chaos. Would it not be fair to say that when the Prophet ﷺ comes in, he provides exactly the kind of state structure which then stabilizes and then allows the kind of economic prosperity that Medina then had? And arguably that was not in a limited state capacity, because it set a template that even moving forward under the time of Omar and his caliphate, you have the establishment of the Diwan, where you have all kinds of revenue coming into the state to the point where you had profit sharing with the Muslims. I guess the second question that I have within that is that these are examples where the state didn't have to impose taxes because the revenue that was being gained from conquest was so high. That doesn't mean that Muslims should go out to conquer in order to keep the taxes low, but that is a source of where the economic prosperity is coming. So I'm wondering if I could hear your views on the relationship between conquest, economic gain, and the ability to then lower taxes as being the driver. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Okay. First of all, thank you for asking these good questions. Number one, in the very early stage of Islamic, state, when Prophet Muhammad ﷺ migrated from Mecca to Medina, one of the first activities that he did was actually establish a market. One of the first. So it is important to have an open market where people can offer their products in a flat area and where the prices are determined by supply and demand. And not any corner specifically assigned to anybody. The open, flat, transparent area, even before establishing other institutions within that society, a plural society, by the way, the market was established. That's important. Second, at that time, the institutional or structuralization or taking a very structured political institutions was not there. It was a plural society where not only Muslims, but there was also non-Muslims, Jews, etc. And the Medina Wasiqa, the document of Medina, like the first constitution of Islamic State, if you like, was a very pluralist one. But after that, once the fetihler,
Conquest.
Conquest, yes. Conquest started, the state started to grow up. And then it was not easy to actually administer the expenditures of the government in one side and the revenues. Revenues coming from the areas that newly, controlled. And then it was Caliph Ömer had to institutionalize the government. The Diwan, the first, minister of Council of Ministers, was established during Ömer, as far as I know, and the Beytul Mal, the government budget, was also established during his time. As the area controlled by the Muslim government enlarged, if you like, they had to impose new rules and regulations, yet after the Umayyad period, until the Umayyad period, it was relatively simple, just open, pluralistic one. The centralization of the administration and then distributing the revenues to particular ones, I think started later on, after the four rightly guided caliphs, the Umayyad period. So partially the enlarging the political control area, partly the political tension between the historical political tension between the Umayyad and the other Quraysh, tribes, unfortunately, actually put new and some unfortunate, if you like, impositions, new rules. We are not comfortable to actually defend, if you like. So historical parts, enlarging the controlled area, and the tension between Umayyads and the Hashemids, I would say.
Thank you. If I could just add to this question of yours, let me just offer two additional thoughts. So one is that institution which the Prophet established after Hijrah was obviously the institution of Muakhat, which is kind of a social arrangement, a voluntary arrangement, in which the spares were made between Ansar and Muhajirun based on the compatibility. If one was bringing skill, the other was having trade, and this is again reflects like a social order rather than a state, policy. I think that played a very important role in that early time of Medina in establishing. And also, Medina and Makkah had two different but complementing cultural characteristics. One is that Makkah had a lot of like traders, entrepreneurs. Medina was more agriculture, more settled society. And if people with a lot of trade or global trade people, experience coming into a society, this would have created a new dynamism which was not existing before Hijrah, and formation of Muakhar that created that link, that bond, which then unleashed prosperity in that era. So while the rules are important, and then of course, as Mustafa mentioned, role of Misak, having all the tribes, Muslims, Jews, Christians together, so there was peace. So the peace was the first order, but then there was the social arrangement which also helped the transformation of Medina.
If I can just follow, that's a beautiful analysis. It's also incredibly Marxian, because we're talking about, bringing together those with skill and those with trade.
Yeah.
So you have labor and capital.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at Makkah and Medina as one as being a locus of trade,
Yeah.
and then you've got an agricultural-based society. This is one of the whole things that Marx, of course, is critiquing, is that unless you have reached the point of a certain level of industrialization, his ideas are not going to work in an agrarian society. So, congratulations on that.
Okay. Thank you. After your response, I will take my answer more seriously.
Well, I did.
I will now. Please.
Thank you for the contribution.
Please.
So, hello everyone, thank you for your presentation. I have a question in the hadith that the prices are determined by Allah. So, not questioning the authenticity of the hadith, but can it be, or is it a hadith that maybe if it is misused by leaders, by economists or entrepreneurs and whoever has a power to say something, can it mislead and misuse the hadith and maybe shift the accountability by saying that the prices are determined by Allah and the people can do whatever they want to do, or can it lead to the economic failure? So, for example, if you say to a Muslim, this is the qadr of Allah, so he will be, okay, this is the qadr of Allah and I can do whatever, I have to agree with it. Does this, maybe the misinterpretation of this hadith, does it create only the poor and the rich in the society, having a big gap in between?
Okay.
So how can we deal with that?
Yeah.
Very good question. Very good question. It is extremely important how you understand and how you interpret that hadith. Okay, so prices determined by Allah means what? Is it okay? Whatever you do is automatically determined by God, or should we understand it as it is beyond the control of any single individual, but rather the interaction of hundreds of thousands of people, demanders and the sellers and the buyers, comers and the goers, consumers and the producers. So what I understand from that hadith is it should not be, the prices should not be controlled or determined by a single body, be it a single person or a government body or something. It should not be fixed. It should not be, determined. Rather, it should be a natural outcome of the interaction between sellers and the buyers, and the producers and the consumers. So that means it is not you, it is not me, it is not the government body, but rather the people who come to buy something, who need to sell something, who need to get and then satisfy his or her needs. That's why it is the interaction between the outcome of the economic activities of the marketplace and the marketplace with all the thousands of people. But unfortunately, it is possible, as you said, to be misinterpreted by some politicians, some government bodies. I know from my country that actually the central bank was not an independent body. and then the government expenditures were not controlled and reduced by the political authority, and the budget deficit, skyrocketingly went high, and then they had to print money to finance those budgets. And then, as you see, economically, the prices went up. The inflation was one of the highest in the world, not only in the Middle East, in the world. Among the five highest inflation rate was Turkey. And then, once upon a time, they said, oh, prices are determined by God. Come on. This is not the interpretation, the right interpretation, So it is the interaction among all the buyers and sellers, consumers and producers in the marketplace, not by a single government body. Thank you.
Thank you. Just very briefly, one line is that, of course, price freedom was set up during that time, but another key institution which the Prophet Muhammad set up was the institution of Hisbah. So if you look at both, so on one hand there was no price control, but on the other hand he set up an institution of Hisbah for market regulation. And in Hisbah, the terms of reference for inspector was very well defined in terms of contract enforcement, any fraudulent activities, corner market, information asymmetry, people were dealing outside the market. So all these practices were forbidden by law. So he knew that entrepreneurs, businessmen would make this possible, for exploitation is possible, it happens. So how to preempt that? So on one hand, he allowed the price to move freely, but on the other hand, there were some regulations which were introduced. Sorry.
Just to follow up on what you mentioned, when the government, if you notice, I call this the domino effect. Government interferes in market forces, manipulates something, that creates another problem. Then they manipulate this, then it creates another problem, and oftentimes much bigger.
Exactly.
And then they manipulate this, and then that I call this the domino effect. When they printed money to finance this deficit, well, the deficit itself is wrong.
Yeah.
There shouldn't be deficit.
Yeah.
And they always have good excuses to do that. Always.
Exactly.
Just like any socialist, communist government, they kill people for a good cause,
Exactly.
So fixing prices is equally as bad. When they say, Allah huwa al-Musa'id, God is the price setter, that's the hadith. Or al-Musa'id is one of the names of Allah. The 99 names of Allah, al-Musa'id. So that's why it creates a bigger problem. And the government in Turkey, where I have business there, oftentimes they try to control prices.
Exactly.
I mean, how can you be an Islam-based government that is violating the principles, the basic principles of Islam? If this is not deviation from religion, I don't know what it is. We're not talking about the rituals of Islam. Actually, this is marginal in religion, right? Ad-din wal mu'amili, meaning religion is how we deal with each other. So this is puzzling for me as a liberal.
Yeah.
I feel I'm more religious than they are.
Yeah.
And I feel I'm more communist than the communists because I care about the poor.
Yeah.
They pay him lip service, I provide jobs. So they can make a living with dignity, not as a handout and turn them into beggars, So sometimes I feel I'm more communist than the communists and I'm more Islamist than the Islamists, which is kind of strange,
More liberal than liberal.
Yeah.
I think I am.
Sorry, Badruddin and Ilu.
Dr. Mazza, I'm sorry. What do you call the price fixing by the private sector, and what about the domino effect that can come here? I'll give you an example. Supposing at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there was somebody who had a monopoly or close to a monopoly on water wells. I mean,
that's a question for me. I can answer it very easily. First of all, the hypothesis is wrong. Who has a monopoly of water?
Well,
2/3 of the planet is water. So when you open the market, this cannot happen practically. This is a very theoretical. In practice, nobody can have monopoly on water, even in the desert. When trade is free, you'll find people selling water more than people who are willing to drink water. So I don't believe this is possible. This is like you say, what if there's monopoly on air? How could that be? You know. So I don't believe when you have a tradition of a free market, these monopolies hardly ever exist, and if they do, it'll be for a very, very short period of time. That's my experience in life and being in business in so many different countries. I hear this only from people who really, with all due respect, obviously I don't mean you, you know, it's a hypothetical situation. I just don't want to be misunderstood. But I hear it from people who either do not understand the dynamics of the free market well enough or never lived it. That's why I say it's a domino. If this happens, I guarantee you, it's because of a lack of permit from a government somewhere, or limiting transport somewhere, but it never happens in nature.
Barrier
So,
to
in order
entry.
to manage the time, but
Yeah, just a couple of
thanks,
things.
Martin, for your response. But
No, I'm trying to put things together. I just.
you don't have to.
Briefly.
Just ask the question. Or a comment.
Just a brief comment. The ethical dimension added by the same hadith actually on the Tas'ir, hadith al-Musa'ir. The Prophet ﷺ added in another hadith that, firstly in the same hadith, إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْمُسَعِّرُ وَالْقَابِضُ وَالْبَاسِطُ وَالرَّزَّاقُ. So he added 4 attributes of God. By the way, they're not part of the 99 names of Allah. They're not, at least in the hadith of Abu Hurairah in Sahih Muslim. So they were later discussed by theologians like Ibn Hazm and the Shawkani. Can we call Allah as part of His names and attributes? Can we add things more than this 99? That's just a brief parenthesis. But the other hadith that's more interesting in Sahih Muslim, where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-muhtakiru mal'un wal-jalib marzuq." I find this maybe serves more your discussion here. That al-jalib, someone who comes to the market with more goods and helps, the circulation of goods, is marzuq. He's provided by God. He's supported, and maybe even by people who should support that operation. And al-muhtakiru mal'un. Al-muhtakir, monopoly. Someone who practices monopoly is mal'un. He's cursed. So probably this just to put the cherry on the top of the.
Hoarding is not
You have
allowed.
a comment.
I was gonna-
Ömer, please ask.
I was
the
going to
question.
ask that, isn't there any regulations on the market? Because I remember at least 2 hadiths. In one, it is not prohibited, it's not allowed to buy all the products of a producer at the entrance of the city. So it prevents to monopoly. And the second one, as I remember, mixing different quality goods is not also allowed. So these are state interventions. These can be interpreted as state interventions, I believe. So this is not a free market, that much free market, at least.
Okay.
Because these are moral regulations, at least. Not cheating them, not
Okay.
buying all the goods.
In my opinion, in our opinion, I guess, free market does not mean free of rules, free of regulations, free of institutions. There should be an authority in case we need, okay? If people try to violate the rules, violate the transparency, to try to monopolize a specific area, whatever, or cheating the customer with a, selling a low quality product, but showing it as the best quality product, or something like that, lying, cheating. There should be a, justice provider. So that means Free market does not mean no government, no rules, no regulations. But free market means open market, prices are not fixed, open to everyone, no barriers to entry, no monopolization, and if there is a violation of the rules, there must be intervention.
Right, thank you. At this point, we have to move to the second. You have a comment here? Because we have just 2 minutes. Oh, sorry, Edo, please.
Edo has a question too.
Actually, we can also continue to discuss in the second session.
Okay.
Another comment, I will just ask a question instead of the comment. How should we perceive the moral obligations? If we perceive moral obligations in place of a legal regulation, then how we can talk about individual responsibility, freedom to choose, and how we can talk about a sin, an individual religious responsibility. That is a kind of a line that also we need to discuss, that whether a state is formulated out of these moral obligations or not within Islam. We can discuss all through the 2 days.
So, it's a general question that we can
General
take.
question that we need to discuss.
Edo?
There's good discussion on the debate. The question was very good. The response of Salman was also on the issue of the private sector. You know the government, the issues with the government, that was fine. We all agree with it. But the private sector has also been an issue. And I think there was a basis for institutionalizing market processes. So we have this hadith, I can't now remember, I'm very jealous of those who can quote the hadith and everything, about intercepting caravans before they reach the market, and it was prohibited. So it is not like the freedom to act in a private manner as you wish and to essentially endanger the market process. So there's a certain element of manipulation. So yes, we leave the prices to God, but within a market institution where we have, as you said, we have rules, we have ethics, and we have someone to oversee that everything is being done as should be. So we don't just leave it to, powers to total freedom to determine what is happening, but we establish market institutions which ensure that there is a fair process for everyone.
Yeah. Right.
So that is very important.
Thank you for this nice closing remarks. Like it. So we move to the second presentation, but before that, I would like to make a request. And that request is to accommodate our 2 or 3 friends sitting outside, also join at the table. Let's, if you can squeeze a bit and bring them in part of the
Why
room
not?
so that we can all adjust and we can all have a stretch break for a minute.
What do you mean?
Noor, can you put
It's gonna work if you make it full screen.
full screen, please?
Yeah. She did in the previous presentation. Yeah.
You can do it. All right, so we're all set to start. Can you take one of the seats? Oh, okay, great. So we're all set here. Perfect. Thank you. I'm sorry that I forgot to ask you and request for introductions. My mistake. You want to do it now or do it at the end? Özlem? I forgot to ask the introduction of all of us.
That is true.
My mistake.
We can
At the end of the session.
do it in another session.
At the end of the session, we can do it.
Or at the
Okay,
end of the
let's
session.
jump to the second presentation, which is by Mohamed Badredine, and the topic is genealogy of Islamic legal thought in Europe, lessons from Muslim communities in era of division. So, from economic freedom we jump into pluralism. Looking forward to Badr's presentation.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. Well, because some of you were calling for ijtihad, reopening the gates of ijtihad, I will take you to a quick visit to Medina Fiqh, not Bazaar, through this brief genealogy of Islamic legal thought in Europe. So I began with the central question of my paper. So what can an understanding of Islamic legal landscape in Europe offer us? Can it promote peaceful coexistence in our time? And what do we risk by ignoring the development of Islamic jurisprudence in Europe? These are the key questions of the paper. And before I move on, I just want to highlight that in a world fragmenting daily into small pieces, Islamic discourse is even more vulnerable to fragmentation into mutually hostile parts. And this is because the Islamic world consists of a fabric of diverse ethnicities, peoples, schools of thought, customs, languages, and languages across centuries of expansion and contraction, peace and war. In the Islamic intellectual system, fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, follows kalam. Fiqh follows theology or kalam in shaping Muslim consciousness. And as some of you referred to the decadence or the collapse in research and thinking somewhere around the 12th century. So research in kalam weakened, and that was followed by a contraction in the study of usul al-fiqh. Fiqh itself rose and fell until in public discourse it became reduced to the duality, or what I want to call the duality or dichotomy of halal versus haram and sunnah versus bid'ah in public discourse. Yet we know that al-ahkam al-taklifiyya, or the normative rulings related to our acts as Muslims and deeds, are more than that. They are more than sunnah and bid'ah and halal and haram. And usul scholars, theorists discuss 5 according to Jumhur al-Usuliyin and 7 according to the Hanafis. Sometimes these Imam al-Haramain in his waraqat also said that al-ahkam al-taklifiyya are 5, adding the rukhsa wal-azima in addition to al-mubah, al-haram, al-makruh, al-mustahab, wal-wajib. So he added 2 more, al-rukhsa, al-fasid, wal-sahih, and some sources add more than that. So this is the first dilemma for me, that we are reducing the discourse, the legal discourse into halal versus haram. This is what we often hear if we if we Google a few things, a few words, hukmu kada, or the ruling of something, or that's what we have been hearing or listening to on media for a couple of decades now. This reduction of the ahkam, which diminishes diversity, is often divorced from an awareness of its epistemological foundations, its intellectual tools, such as language and logic, and its historical development rooted in foundational texts, such as the verse of Surah At-Tawbah. I put there a translation, I hope that it's clear. وَمَا كَانَ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَنْ يَنْفِرُوا كَافَّةً فلولا نفر من كل فرقة منهم طائفة ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم لعلهم يحذرون. Surah At-Tawbah. So fiqh was deeply shaped by such foundational texts, in addition to early definitions or broader and more comprehensive definitions and concepts of fiqh, such as the definition of Imam Abu Hanifa, al-fiqh ma'rifatu al-nafsi ma laha wa ma alayha. Fiqh is self-knowledge, self-awareness. It's not just to do something mechanically. This is halal, this is haram. It's broader than. It's more dynamic. It's richer and more intellectually enlightening and inspiring. Although the jurists later on specialized the concept of fiqh within the theory of Islamic legislation, they did not overlook its centrality in the Islamic system of knowledge and in the lived reality of Muslims. So the journey of Islamic legal thought, especially in its early stages, here, I cannot cover here in 20 minutes the journey of Islamic legal thought across Europe, so I'm highlighting a few cases, especially or specifically the early cases across the Mediterranean, which was also a hub for thoughts, for ethnicities, languages, etc., and religions. This journey offers a discourse far more liberated, comprehensive, inclusive, and effective despite the political instabilities of that era than the dominant discourse today. And what I mean by the dominant discourse today, again, this is a very large topic. I want to highlight two phenomena of two practices, two concepts which affect or impact Islamic jurisprudence nowadays. These two dominant reductionist discourses dominating nowadays in Europe are these two. The first is what I call the Salafi discourse in its multiple forms. You have the Wahhabi, you have the Reformist, you have the Jihadi, and etc. is strongly present in Europe, and it is shaping negatively, of course, the legacy of the Islamic legal thought across Europe. And the second, this might be surprising for some of you, the Maqasidi centered discourse. Maqasid-centered discourse for me is, in my humble opinion, the other face of the Salafi discourse. Why? Because today, many researchers in the West, in Western universities, in the Arab world, similarly, they emphasize maqasid, or the higher objective of law, often linked to Shatibi and Ghazali and Qarafi and this generation of scholars. Nowadays, we have a increasingly an exclusive discussion or treatment of maqasid. So I said that they use it as a gateway to intellectual liberation and juridical flexibility and the bridge to modernity, in other words. So this, while being largely true, maqasid are unfortunately presented as an independent science or a miraculous tool of renewal. In reality, maqasid is just another branch of usul al-fiqh. Maqasid is one of the chapters studied in usul al-fiqh. You go across a full manual or textbook of usul al-fiqh. The last chapters are maqasid. So you cannot just pick up the chapter of maqasid and study it, and then you say, like, we are coming up with some new solutions out of nowhere. This is just like the Salafis who say, we want the Islamic discourse, the Islamic version that we want it to prevail is a literalist version. It's solely based on a hadith or a text, like the literal, or that zahiriyya, like exaggeration in literal approach. So the same thing, I found that many researchers are approaching maqasid this way. They disconnect maqasid from its very rich rational, linguistic, and intellectual context and framework. The next point. So my paper claims that educating Muslim youth and Muslims in general in Europe about the structure of the legal thought or the judicial system in the European Mediterranean region, especially since this was a formative phase of Islamic jurisprudence, will help European Muslims gain intellectual independence, opening a window toward freedom and coexistence. So hence, we should rediscover these 3 points. The legal theory of Islam in Europe, which was formed through multiple or multi-madhab and multi-ethnic networks, and that we need to understand that the journey of Islamic legal thought in Europe enjoyed diverse pedagogical traditions, and here I want to refer to Özlem's point, how to balance individual responsibility or moral responsibility with when we talk about free markets. So here pedagogy and education steps in. And finally, Islamic jurisprudence never ceased evolving in Europe before modern times. Intellectual freedom is intrinsic to it. So only by internalizing this diversity and development can European Muslims enjoy cultural plurality, intellectual freedom, and contribute to ethical and social awareness and coexistence. Even during periods of conflict, greater intellectual production emerged from this context, from this perception, from this broader approach to Islamic legal thought in Europe. Before the Catholic expulsion of Muslims and Jews from Al-Andalus, the incident known as historically as Reconquista, the Umayyad ruler Al-Hakam ibn Hisham, or Hakam I, expelled thousands of Muslims, including fuqaha, jurists, following a Maliki revolution in Al-Andalus. Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi, one of the key reporters and transmitters of Al-Muwatta, of Imam Malik ibn Anas, led what is historically known as Mawqi'atu al-Rabad, the revolt of al-Rabad in Qurtuba. So based on that, the thousands were exiled, and some settled in Iqritish. And Iqritish, or Crete nowadays in Europe, those who fled from the tyranny of the ruler in Al-Andalus were fuqaha, jurists from Al-Andalus, settled in Crete. So they were refugees, and established one of the earliest Islamic emirates around 824. And traces of a 1 century old society and tradition can still be found across a variety of historical sources. Al-Qadi Abu al-Hasan al-Talbani, or al-Tilbani, a Maliki jurist and judge. So the first thing when we read the biography of this judge, we know that in Crete there was qada, there was a system of qada, which opens other windows on education, on market. Some of you said that Prophet ﷺ arrived in Medina, the first thing he did, he established a market, suq. So having a qadi, a teacher, a mufti, etc., refers to a profound and solid settlement in Crete. There are even documented debates between Al-Qadi Tilbani, Abu Hassan, with Nicephorus, the emperor of Crete, after the fall of Islamic system in the island. We can find other traces from the region which tell a greater stability and more profound legal tradition marked by ethnic, linguistic, and methodological diversity. Now, not far from Iqritish or Crete, Muslims ruled Siqiliya, or Sicily, roughly for 2 centuries. And here another figure can be introduced, Asad ibn al-Furat, from Harran, originally from Harran, a student of Imam Malik, and interestingly, of Mohamed ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, the student of Abu Hanifa, and al-Qadi Abu Yusuf. So this Asad ibn al-Furat, who was a commander, leader, military leader, and judge, and also a student of Malik ibn Anas personally, and Mohamed ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, and al-Qadi Abu Yusuf, all together. Asad embodied Hanafi, Maliki, fiqh, and usul synthesis in his early collection or book called Al-Asadiyya. after a long journey from Tunisia to Medina to Iraq to Sicily and back to Tunisia. The journey was recorded both by Hanafis and Malikis, even though being officially Maliki, Asad al-Furat. This journey must tell us a lot in sociology, economics, politics, literature, and beyond, because this jurist, who was, as I said, also a commander and a judge, insisted on meeting different people from different backgrounds, from different methodological approaches of ijtihad, of interpretation of texts, and asking them about their thoughts and approaches. His book, unfortunately, Al-Asadiyya, is lost, ضاعت, and never found. But a lot of Asad's work was preserved because the book continued to travel throughout the Maliki lineage. Nevertheless, it remains a foundational milestone in the development of comparative fiqh, and bringing this dialogue between the Ahnaf and the Malikiyya into a European context. Now, when I will stay a little bit more with Siqiliyya, with Sicily.
5 minutes.
Oh no. If you look at right, so we leave Siqiliyya. We go to.
You have to make choice.
There are many destinations. So between the 13th century and the 14th century, fiqh is often said to have become less genuine and creative, according to many critics. A quick look at one of the books which developed from this journey of al-Asadiyya and Asad al-Furat is Mukhtasar Khalil. Mukhtasar Khalil ibn Ishaq, an Egyptian scholar from the 13th century, was criticized for its extreme condensation or ikhtisar, highly difficult language and heavy use of symbols, especially because the work was intended to be studied as a matan or a manual by scholars qualified to issue fatwa. Well, I don't want to discuss the critiques here, but I want to say that I think that Khalil using that language and condensation, etc., was for a purpose, for a reason. It was not just a coincidence. Khalil was not just a jurist. His name, his biography, it's always said Khalil ibn Ishaq al-Jundi. Jundi. He was a soldier in Egypt. So in my view, it's no coincidence that he relied heavily on these 4 sources. Mukhtasar Khalil is based on these 4 sources. By the way, Mukhtasar Khalil is the first book until now used in Maliki jurisprudence, like for fatwa. Everywhere, wherever the Maliki madhab is applied and practiced, Mukhtasar Khalil is the top level of ifta after Mukhtasar al-Akhdari, Ibn Ashir, Risala ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani. So I think that the 4 Malikis from the 11th and 12th centuries, 3 of them, as you can see here, try to put their origins, 3 of them were Europeans. Abu Abdullah al-Mazari from Sicily, Ibn Yunus al-Siqili from Siqiliyya, from Sicily, and Ibn Rushd, the grandfather, not Averroes, Ibn Rushd al-Qurtubi, al-Jadd. These 4, so he's a Qurtubi from Al-Andalus. So Mukhtasar Khalil, until now, when you study it in Arabic, or you directly or indirectly, you are following European methodologies, opinions, and techniques, obviously reported or reshaped by or at least inspired by the founder of the madhab, Malik ibn Anas. The last, Al-Lakhmi, is a Tunisian scholar. One final point and another feature before the conclusion of Islamic legal thought in Europe is that European Muslim jurists employed local languages alongside Arabic in their fatwas, especially in books or category of fiqh books called nawazil, which are like a collection of local incidents or events or questions related to that region or part of the country. This linguistic openness also influenced other forms of communication, such as poetry. And if you look at an Andalusian genre, you probably heard of muwashahat and asjal genres, for example, through the lens of the biggest and the most preserved collection of this genre is Ibn Quzman, Asjal ibn Quzman, the collection of Ibn Quzman, El Cancionero in Spanish. This book was widely studied by Orientalists such as Ribera, Nickel, and Gomez, etc. And served as an artistic and anthropological encyclopedia. These were European Islamic literary inventions blending Arabic, Romance, Hebrew, and Berber. For conclusion, and I'm just jumping some sections, building on the rich intellectual and cultural context of medieval, this is how genealogy looks like. So this is the isnad, the chain of these schools, both Maliki and Hanafi, in the Mediterranean region, connected through Asad ibn al-Furat, Asadiyya. And then I tried to add other disciplines. Those in purple, they are not necessarily fuqaha, they're not necessarily jurists, but they were deeply influenced by the discourse, the comprehensive discourse of the legal thought established and taught by local fuqaha and usuliyin in Europe. So I said that building on this, the rich intellectual and cultural context on medieval Europe, Islamic legal thought bridged and shaped multiple dimensions of life, including language, literature, architecture, pedagogy, moral and spiritual formation, and the administration of justice, qada, creating a civilizational framework that fostered coexistence among diverse communities. This integration of disciplines functioned as a comprehensive umbrella under which knowledge, ethical reflection, and social cohesion were cultivated together. Although European fiqh eventually declined in regions such as Sicily and Crete and Andalus, it continued to interact for some time with the vibrant and pluralistic intellectual life of the Iberian Peninsula. Even when certain scholars like al-madhahib, like al-Awza'iyya, al-madhab al-Awza'i, and the Zahiriyya, and others fell into obscurity, the underlying structures of comparative reasoning, ethical engagement, and pedagogical practice persisted. This legacy left a lasting imprint on the trajectory of Islamic law and thought in Europe, inspiring Muslims in other parts of the continent to confront new challenges in the wake of the Reconquista. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Badredine, for historical analysis. Very interesting. I open the floor for questions and comments.
I think it is better if we receive the questions afterwards.
After the second presentation?
Because we lack kind of time.
Yeah.
The presentation is short, actually, 10 minutes, 15 minutes.
Okay, so let's have some questions on Badr's presentation, and then please say.
First of all, that was amazing. I'm not sure if have you seen Tariq Hussein's latest book on Muslim Europe? Because I mean, what you've done is not only shattered this dichotomy between halal, haram, and bid'ah and sunnah, but you've also shattered another very important dichotomy of Western and Eastern Mediterranean. You're locating a central Mediterranean geography, which is incredibly important. So thank you for that. But on that topic, then, how do you think this period and this phenomenon, how do you think it affected Muslim identity more broadly, if at all, and European Muslim identity specifically? How do these people see themselves? Do they see themselves as European?
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we don't have any contact with these people I mentioned, like these fuqaha.
I thought they were on speed dial for you.
So that's really, really important. Thank you, sorry. So the first part of the question, how did that influence European Muslims or Muslims in general? I think that the influence nowadays is very marginalized or reduced due to those influences. At least the two I wanted to highlight: the radical discourses or approaches from one side, and there are also other external factors in the international context, policies and so forth. So I think that the influence, at least to that level or to that specific regions I was mentioning, I think that it is very weak, and very few people. I'm here. I'm not using any official statistics, but I can use my humble experience. I mean, I worked in. I was running an Islamic center in France, and now I'm lecturing in the Czech Republic, doing research there. So I can say that many children of the Muslims there, from Arabic, African, or Asian backgrounds, or even converts, they see clearly, they see it like crystal clear that the discourse that exclusively represents Islam is this exclusivist interpretation of Islam, that is Salafism in its different interpretations or manifestations. Additionally, I added that this Puritanist approach created a new phase, a new wave of scholars who are not Muslims, but they are writing and working on Islam through the lens of Salafism, and they are obsessed with cleaning Islam. They talk, for example, about Sufism or saints or shrines or things that are questions of disagreement in Islamic fiqh. They have nothing to do with aqidah. That most of these things, the graves and shrines and tasawwuf things, they are discussed in fiqh within a jurisprudential framework. You find these people who are, as I said, they are Westerners, they are non-Muslim, that they do anthropological research, and they side by, interestingly, by that narrative of the Salaf. Why? Because media, you Google something like that, you find that Islam Web or Islam Question and Answer, Ibn Baz said, and so forth. With respect to all approaches and schools, I'm just saying what is going on. And the second thing is that how do these people introduce themselves? If you refer to these ancient figures like Asad al-Furat, and if we meet them through their biographies, because they are very well documented, and we can even look at we can verify that easily through these chains of transmission, which is part of the educational system in legal thought. So if you look at them, they had this pluralistic and inclusive approach. I don't know if they say that I am European, but in the biographies, for example, pick up Tartib al-Madarik of Al-Qadi Iyad, 11th century source encyclopedia, or Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, which is more objective maybe because Dhahabi was not a Maliki scholar. So if you read the biographies of this generation of scholars, you will find a list of attributions. They say Al-Maghribi, Al-Siqilli, Al-Andalusi. So they mention all the possible attributes. And here, because I can give an example of one controversial figure, Jawhar al-Siqilli. Jawhar al-Siqilli believed to be the conqueror of, not the conqueror, the builder of Cairo and Al-Azhar. Right? Jam' al-Azhar was built by a person called Jawhar al-Siqilli. So Jawhar, in his biographies, we find two sifat, two adjectives, two attributions. We find al-Siqilli, which is the most famous one, and al-Saqlabi, which means the Slavic. Al-Saqlabi, a singular of Saqaliba, which is Slavs. So was Jawhar Saqlabi, a Slav, or a Sicilian? Was he Siqilli or Saqlabi? Now, to solve this dilemma, which is an ongoing debate actually, I mean, in all cases, Jawhar was under the Fatimid rule, right? Fatimid dynasty. They built Al-Azhar, they built Al-Qahira. They were neither Malikiya wala Shafi wala Hanaf, they were Shia. So they built Al-Azhar. Now to solve the dilemma, some people suggest that these two attributions or ethnicities are both correct. He was originally Slav, who was Saqlabi Aslan. He's originally Slav because the Slavs were joined Islam and Muslim communities and political work and engagement very early, earlier than the Sicilians. And he is Sicilian because he lived there. He's one of the early conquerors of Sicily.
Sorry, we can definitely solve that problem in a few hours, but maybe a couple of minutes. Any?
I want to add something just a short.
Yeah,
At this point, we may ask the question that is there a distinctive European identity at that time, as today? Perhaps not.
Perhaps not, but it was visible. It was visible in their legislative legacy. We see that we heard Ali in the morning saying that Ash-Shatibi. Why did he mention Ash-Shatibi?
Because he was born there.
But what was his contribution? So Ash-Shatibi.
Since there is no European domination, I don't think they try to show that we are European.
No, I don't think that they tried that. But I think that Europe, as a cultural context, influenced their thought.
Yeah, Moqaf.
That's what I believe. Yeah.
Any other question?
Yes, I have a very short question, which might not be relevant to the paper, but it's somehow linked. Now let's talk about the 20th century now in Europe. I'm not sure where are you based, but
In Prague.
in Prague. Okay, good. So you are in Europe. So in the UK now, if I ask somebody, if I go to the masjid and then they say that we have to talk about Islam, always they talk about Sirah. I don't see them talking about, you were in Cambridge also, they don't much talk about fiqh, tawheed, aqidah. Most of the discussion about Sirah. And then these are considered to be alim. So the question now in Europe, so what it means to be alim. So alim in Saudi Arabia, alim in Egypt, is a scholar, someone who has deep knowledge in fiqh, deep knowledge of tafsir, deep knowledge in Quran. But in Europe it's not the case. So what does it mean to be alim in Europe?
Oh, thank you. That's a very good question. But I just wanted to I cannot answer. Huh?
Yeah.
But when?
Now,
Yeah,
nowadays.
it's 21st
Nowadays.
century, because this
Would you like to answer that
is
question?
a very important question, because it's linked to what you
Well, if you want to, I can try. But if you want to discuss it later, I can also do that.
Maybe quickly, like a brief
Um,
answer.
It's linked, by the way, it's not far.
Well, the reason for which we discuss Sirah and not to reduce the importance of Sirah Nabawiyya, but it's less crucial and fundamental in forming a scholar in the hierarchy of Islamic knowledge. The reason why we discuss Sirah in mosques in Europe is primarily because it's less controversial. If you start discussing fiqh in a mosque, you will have, you know what happens. So, fiqh that's it. That's the nature of fiqh itself.
Yeah.
It's based on ikhtilaf, on disagreement. So it's not a great idea to discuss fiqh issues unless it's a circle of study with qualified people. So it's a good idea to discuss sirah in a mosque. The concept of alim is mostly here in Europe is mostly connected to the broader context of Islam and Islamic world. By the way, this is an anecdote. Maybe last year or 2 years ago, I was in the airport and I met Sheikh Mustafa Acar, the former mufti of Bosnia. Was that? Yeah. I saw him many times, but this time in particular at the airport, we were discussing something, and he himself brought this thing that أنا من الصقالبة. because I mentioned that he did not say that, but because I mentioned that I did a PhD on Islamic jurisprudence in Al-Andalus, right?
What did he say?
He said, I am from Saqaliba, I am from the Slavs, because the Slavs are best known for their deep influence in Andalusian society, jurisprudence, legal thought, etc. Right? They had a very strong influence, unlike many people who think that it was an Arabic civilization. It was not. So I think that a alim in European context cannot be separated from Sheikh Mustafa, maybe other names before him. Qadi al-Jama'a, Sheikh al-Islam, Mohamed al-Kawthari and others, they were connected to Al-Azhar, they were connected to Zaytuna, they were connected to the Al-Qarawiyyin, the Islamic centers across the Muslim world. So it's hard to say that a European scholar nowadays is a 100% European production.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Badr, I wish we can have more time, but obviously we need to move on to the third and last presentation for this session, which is by Bekir Berat, but he is not here. He could not make it, and we also have Ömer Faruk, co-author of this paper and presentation. So I will request Dr. Ömer Faruk to present on the Beyond the Incompatibility narrative.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Let me check. Is this okay? No. Oops. Doesn't.
Let's try again.
Thank you. The work I'm presenting today is the result of a joint project carried out with Professor Bekir Berat. Unfortunately, he was not able to join us today, but all the arguments I will present here are the outcome of our shared discussions and the framework we developed together. This study was announced in the program under the title that Beyond the Incompatibility Narrative, the Potential and Future of Liberalism in Muslim Societies. In fact, this was one of the two titles we initially proposed. As the work developed, however, we came to the conclusion that another title reflected our main argument more clearly, which is defending liberalism in Muslim societies against the liberals. The core idea of my short presentation today is shaped precisely around this title. The relationship between Islam and liberalism has long been discussed through a single question. Are they compatible or incompatible? On one side of this debate, there are those who emphasize aspects of Islam that value the individual, property, trade, and exchange. On the other side, there are approaches that argue liberal values are incompatible with Islam's theological or cultural structure. I believe you know these two sides well. In this study, we argue that this very framing of the debate itself problematic, because instead of explaining the core problem, it tends to reduce the issue to easy labels such as cultural incompatibility. Our central claim is the following. One of the main reasons for the distance toward liberalism in Muslim societies is not an essential incompatibility between Islam and liberalism. The real issue is how liberalism is represented at the global level and for whom it is defended. In other words, the problem is not liberal values themselves, but the selective, inconsistent, and often ethnocentric practices of those who claim to represent them. This is what we refer to as a crisis of representation. At the theoretical level, liberalism emerged as a tradition that defends universal individual rights, the rule of law, and political equality. In practice, however, we observe that the defense of liberal values is often carried out in ways that are ethnocentric, selective, and highly sensitive to power relations. This situation strengthens a widespread perception in Muslim societies, which is liberalism is not a moral framework that applies equally to everyone, but an instrumental discourse that legitimizes mostly Western interests. Importantly, this perception is not directed at the conflict of liberalism itself, but rather at how liberalism is represented. At this point, let me clarify something important. Our argument is not that liberalism is inherently flawed or normatively bankrupt. On the contrary, our critique is grounded in taking liberalism seriously. The problem we identify is not liberalism as a normative tradition, but the gap between its universal claims and its selective political practice.
And finally, what did you say? And selective
Selective political practice.
practice.
Okay, I would like to emphasize that this crisis of representation is not unique to Muslim societies. In this regard, the experience of Nelson Mandela is highly instructive. Mandela openly acknowledged that in the struggle against apartheid in South Africa, he cooperated with communists. At the same time, he explicitly stated that he was not himself a communist. One of Mandela's most striking observations is the following. For decades, he says, the only political group genuinely willing to recognize black South Africans as human beings, to treat them as equals, and to defend their political rights was communists. This does not mean that Mandela embraced communism. What it clearly shows is this. Actors who theoretically claimed to defend individual rights under liberalism were, in practice, often not at the forefront of defending those rights. This gap between liberalism's normative claims and the historical performance of liberal actors is crucial for understanding how liberalism is perceived. Besides, this issue is not merely historical. Unfortunately, we see that it continues today. Let me give a concrete and contemporary example. In 2015, in the German state of Baden-Württemberg, a proposal was introduced to grant Muslims 1 day of leave for a religious holiday. This proposal was opposed by the Christian Democrats and Free Democrats. It was accepted thanks to the votes of the Greens and Social Democratic Party. This example shows that when the basic rights of Muslims are at stake, it's often not liberal parties, but actors on the political left who adopt a more consistent line of defense. One of the areas where this crisis of representation is most visible is foreign policy. Concepts such as human rights, democracy, and the rule of law are often defended only insofar as they align with geopolitical interests. When they conflict with those interests, the same values are quietly pushed aside. This produces deep mistrust toward liberalism's claims to universality. In this context, the case of Palestine functioned as a clear litmus test of liberalism's crisis of representation. In fact, in the face of Israel's policies of killing, disposition, and forced displacement in Palestine, the silence displayed by large segments of Western liberal circles is striking. At this point, it is no longer convincing to argue that the issue is a lack of information or the complexity of geopolitical balances. The issue is where moral boundaries are drawn. This silence clearly reveals where and for whom liberalism's claim to universality is suspended. I want to emphasize that I'm referring to the Palestinian issue here not because it's unique, but because it makes the underlying problem unusually visible. It reveals in a stark way how claims to universality operate when they come into conflict with power, alliances, and strategical interests. This brings us to the second core argument of our study. We are arguing that what emerges here is a vicious circle. The selective practices of liberal actors generate mistrust and reactive attitudes in Muslim societies. This reaction is then explained by Western actors as evidence that Muslim societies are inherently illiberal. This explanation, in turn, legitimizes selective practices once again. As a result, the claim that Islam is incompatible with liberalism functions as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Let me slow down here for a moment and explain what I mean by this vicious circle in a more concrete way, because this part is important. What I'm describing is not an abstract mechanism. It is a process that unfolds step by step, First, when major crises affect Muslim societies, such as wars, occupations, humanitarian disasters, or long-term structural injustices, Western liberal actors often fail to respond in line with liberalism's own core principles. In many cases, they do not simply remain silent, they actively position themselves on the wrong side. Strategic interest, security narratives, and geopolitical alliances take precedence over the protections of basic human rights. Second, this pattern produces a very predictable reaction. Muslims begin to lose trust, not only in liberal actors, but in the liberal language itself. Liberalism starts to appear not as a universal moral framework, but as a selective discourse, a language that speaks loudly when others are the victims and falls silent when Muslims are the victims. At this point, distancing from liberal actors is not an ideological rejection. It's a reactive response to perceived hypocrisy. Third, and this is where the circle closes, this very reaction is then used by liberal actors as evidence against Muslims themselves. Look, they say, they are already against us. This reaction is interpreted as a proof of hostility, as proof of cultural incompatibility, or even as proof of an inherent illiberalism. And on the basis of this interpretation, Islamophobic attitudes are reinforced, exclusions are justified, and selective practices are further normalized. So the process feeds itself. Selective liberal practices produces reactiveness. That reactiveness is read as cultural or civilizational hostility, and this reading then legitimizes even more selectively. What is presented as an objective diagnosis of incompatibility is in fact the outcome of a self-reinforcing political process. At this point, we ask the following question. If liberalism truly represents a universal set of values, is defending those values meaningful only against authoritarian regimes or radical movements? Or should liberal values also be defended consistently against actors who define themselves as liberals? We obviously defend the second position. And for this reason, we believe that defending liberalism against the liberals is not a contradiction, but a natural consequence of taking liberalism seriously. At this point, I want to be very clear about what we are doing here. Criticizing liberals does not mean rejecting liberalism. In fact, it means exactly the opposite. Our critique starts from the assumption that liberalism's core principles still matter, which are individual rights, legal equality, limits on power. These principles remain normatively compelling. What has failed, in many cases, is not liberalism as a moral tradition, but those who claim to speak in its name. What we observe in practice is that liberal actors often suspend the most basic liberal commitments, precisely when Muslims become the primary victims. Rights that are treated as non-negotiable elsewhere, such as the right to life, protection from collective punishment, equality before law, suddenly become conditional. They become negotiable, or they become strategically inconvenient. And this is exactly why criticizing liberals becomes a way of defending liberalism itself. When we insist that liberal values must also apply when Muslims are the oppressed party, we are not weakening liberalism. We are reaffirming its universal promise. So defending liberalism against the liberals is not a rhetorical provocation. It's a normative question and normative position. It reflects the conviction that liberalism can survive as a universal moral language only if it's protected from selective application, political convenience, and moral double standards. We argue that such a defense must be carried out on at least three levels. First, liberal democracies that use liberal values to mask their own interests should be criticized precisely through liberalism's own normative claims. Second, the global order that operates in favor of the powerful and produces structural injustice should be questioned from within liberal values, rather than being automatically left to leftist or anti-liberal frameworks. Third, While clearly distinguishing between the normative claims of liberalism and the practical failures of liberal actors, we must also ask an uncomfortable question, which is, why is the struggle against these injustices so often carried out not by liberals, but by their political rivals? Let me conclude by emphasizing the following. The future of liberalism in Muslim societies depends less on abstract debates about cultural compatibility and more on whether a political and moral language can be developed that is genuinely willing to carry the burden of liberalism's claim to universality. Because universal values cannot survive for long in the hands of those who are unwilling to pay the cost of defending them. Thank you.
Great presentation, Ömer. I open the floor for discussion and questions.
I will be happy if you add something because I'm not expecting to answer your questions clearly, but I'm expecting some contributions to weaken parts, to strengthen.
You have a question?
No, we can send by mail to our programs.
Yeah, I have a question to begin. And that is the question, you refer to liberals as in political positions, you mentioned a few political discussions. I was wondering if you looked at the intellectual spectrum within the debate on Palestine or on other issues, and whether you see similar diversion which you saw in the political spectrum. Did you see a consensus or a...
Well, we have also discussed this issue last night, but in our study, we made a distinction between intellectual liberals and political actors, political parties, governments, and political associations who claim that they are liberals. So we are referring the second when we say liberal actors.
Political actors.
Political actors. Because in intellectual area, in universities, we see that liberals are highly helpful or highly, how to say, they are
not homogeneous. There are heterogeneous positions, stands among the intellectuals and academicians, unlike the political parties and governments.
Okay. And let me remind you, this paper is a co-work of Bekir Berat Hoca and me, so there are some parts I don't disagree with him. He is more overgeneralizing, but mostly, this is our argument.
Right. Mazin?
Another question, did you make distinction between classic liberals and fake liberals?
We take liberalism as classical liberalism.
So who did you mean by saying liberal here?
We don't find any classical liberalism and liberals anymore.
No classic liberals?
Political.
What is Atlas Network you have here on the letter?
Among the political actors.
Political actors.
Among the political actors, he means.
Among the political actors.
Among political actors. We take liberalism as classical liberalism in this study, but when we look at the practice, we don't find any classical liberals and liberal
consistent ones.
Consistent ones.
Please.
Thank you. Because I think your paper and presentation are really a conversation with, inshallah, what I'll be presenting tomorrow on moral finance. Would you say, it just struck me when you said that there are no classical liberals around. Classical liberalism was based on a false sense of universality because of the idea that these values could easily be transplanted from one place to the other. But the inception of classical liberalism in Europe comes about after the trauma of the Protestant Reformation. And when you get to Westphalia, the solution isn't about heterogeneity. It's about a group of very homogeneous states. When you have then the establishment of the idea of the nation state, the only way that Europe can keep the peace is if they maintain little pockets of sameness throughout, right? There's no reconciliation, there's no resolution. It's almost like kicking the can down the street. From an Islamic standpoint, and when you're looking at the concept of ummah, it recognizes diversity, it recognizes heterogeneity by taking the abstraction of homogeneity to another level, right? So I'm wondering, how do you see then when
question.
You're upset. And you got 3 minutes before lunch, so.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to answer your question, but I'm not sure where to start. May I just paraphrase your question for one little sentence?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
I mean, I guess I'm just looking at where's the interface, to use tech terms, on bringing about, as you're saying, a defense of liberalism, when liberalism right now is so closely associated with a declining Western construct in which that has been created and perpetuated.
Any ideas?
We can talk about that lunch. I mean, that's
Yeah, we can talk. I'm just thinking, and I have.
We can come back.
Yeah.
We can come back to this question.
Do you have any suggestions?
We can, yeah. I mean, this is the case that we have to, of course, talk. These ideas, and it is not the failure of liberalism itself.
Liberal
it's not
actors.
the failure of the concepts of human rights, of universal law. It's the failure of those Western actors.
How is it represented?
Those so-called Western actors who introduced themselves as the defenders of these values and institutions. So we should also, to add your presentation, we should also say that we should struggle for defending that these rights, these ideas of liberalism have not failed.
Yeah, we already said it in
So
our article.
this is important. So also congratulations for this presentation. I can hear my 30-year long friend Berat's reflection over the presentation. That's all. This is a kind of a strategy of communications, a presentation on the strategy of communications, and what we have to do, liberal Muslims.
Good
indeed.
point. Yeah.
It's a kind of a methodology, a roadmap of what we have to do to defend classical liberal ideas, and this is also another branch to go. Whether we have to discuss incompatibility or not, that we have to show ourselves to the non-Muslim community. Hey, come on, we are compatible. I mean, we need to have self-trust. We need to be kendimize güvenli olmalıyız. We need to trust ourselves. We need to have a self-trust, and for that, we have to know the universal values and institutions. We have to know the Islam's contribution to these universal values. But here the problem are the illiberals in our societies who are so called to be liberals. So we have at a point that we have to defend liberalism towards Muslims and also towards non-Muslims. We have to keep pure liberalism's discourse, both for Muslims and for non-Muslims. As you have given the example of the Friday prayer, Germany. Liberals, liberal Democrats, and Christian Democrats, they oppose this. So when just Greens and Social Democrats follow after, think of the protests for Palestine. Mostly they are leftist people, raising their left arms. I mean, why? For those people who defend the rights of life, the right to life, they are the classical liberals. They should go out and raise their voice that they defend the right to life, right to property of these people. So this is problematic when you look at Muslims, the Muslim communities, religious conservative communities. They oppose liberalism and capitalism. and they blame liberalism and capitalism for the sin of this genocide. So this is a problem. That's why this strategy of communications is important. But and here in your paper, that is important. We have to use the liberal ideas, comments, values against this liberal hypocrisy.
Yeah.
I mean, it is really very difficult for us. That's why we are few. It's very difficult. We are not sure whether we have that we are willing to pay the cost of defending this, because it's really costly for us. We have to keep our stance for those friends who support these ideas in the West. We have to tell them the situation is this. It's very difficult to clear the water. It is really quite difficult.
It's Baratoja's optimistic worldview.
Thank you.
Yeah, I share this optimistic. We have to do this. We have to do this because as a Muslim, I should say, I believe in these classical liberal ideas. They are inherently within Islam, within the Islam's teaching. That's why this is our duty to tell about these values and institutions intrinsic within Islam.
Thank you, Özlem. This is very helpful. I think also answers Said's question in a
Just
way.
one thing, very short.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it would be a good opportunity for us as Muslim intellectuals to defend the liberalism, liberal values, freedom, individual liberties at this age where economic nationalism, collectivism, government intervention, big government, and protectionism is rising.
I strongly agree with your point, and that was a great presentation, thank you. But I will play the backup here. Okay. If there was a socialist in this room and see your presentation, he probably would ask this question. When we criticize socialism as liberals, they generally respond to that criticism that it is not real socialism. This is a cliche. They would say that those were flawed politicians and this is not the ideal socialism that we defend. So after your talk, he would say liberals are doing something similar. Separating the liberal values from the actors, from the practice. How is your distinction different from that? This is not the real socialism move. How would you define that?